Well, one last time I want to beat this drum, and that is how you answer the question of God and his existence vastly influences you like nothing else in the way that you see life, the way that you see death and suffering, the way that you think through meaning and purpose in your life. All of that weaves its way all the way to the question of God and in his existence. There's nothing else. There's not a bigger and more important question to ask, more important than who you should marry, more important than what you should do for a living. Is that question right there. And that's why we've been diving into it over the last 4 weeks. And so today we're gonna finish this up, and we are specifically going to look at the question and how that ties into God is, why are we here? Why are we on this planet? And it's a question that you ask people out on the streets, you're almost going to get almost as many different answers to that question as you have people out on the streets. It's a very confusing question. And sometimes it can be just so hard and difficult that we really just don't even want to spend a lot of mental energy trying to answer that question. Well, if you go about 200 years ago and further down the line, about 200 years or so-ish, if you were to go just to any common street or town and you were to ask people, why are you here? They would probably, without skipping a beat, just say, well, because God put me here. Now, they may ask the question, well, why did God put me here? And that might be another deal. But they would say, because God put me here. And about 200 years ago, what some sociologists would call, we went through or began to go through what was called an anthropological revolution. It's the revolution of man, and how man began to think now differently about the ideas and thoughts of God and life and nature and reason and meaning and purpose. And about 200 years ago, what happened was that man began to become untethered from God. He untethered himself from God, and he tethered himself, to his intellect, to his mind. I no longer need God. I have math, I have science, I have an intellect, I have rationality. And therefore, I don't need God to help me to understand what is truth and what is meaning and what is purpose. And one of the gentlemen who was probably the one of, if not the greatest influencer of that period, whose thoughts and ideas reverberate even into our lives here, everybody in this room. In some ways, we don't even really realize it, and I'll explain a little bit later. But one of those guys who've had one of the greatest influences in our lives when it comes to this whole idea of God is a guy named Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche was the individual who made the phrase popular, God is dead. In fact, he wrote this in his work that he wrote called The Gay Science. He said this is where this comes from. If you've heard this whole idea, God is dead, this is where it comes from. God is dead. God remains dead, and we've killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off us? What Nietzsche is saying here, in a culture that's moving away from God, we no longer need God because we're okay. We don't, God is dead. He doesn't exist. He's not real. We've killed him. Rationality, enlightenment has killed him. And so Nietzsche then begins to ponder the whole, the implications of that. And that's why he calls us, says it like we're like murderers. We've killed him. And so how do we wipe this blood away? How do we deal with this is what basically he was, talking about here. And what he was talking, I think, ultimately was meaning and purpose. What do we do with the implications that there is no God? Because if there is no God, there's really no overarching meaning and purpose in life. Meaning is an illusion. Any type of meaning that you put on your life is just an illusion. because there is no meaning, there is no purpose. You and I, we're cosmic dust. We're no different than the dust in the Sierra or the sand in our front yard. Meaning and purpose, there is no meaning and purpose. No more so than the little cockroach that scurries around in our house that we go over and we want to get rid of it. There is no meaning, there's no purpose. And so the natural inclination of that is despair, what was called nihilism. That everything is meaningless, everything is purposeless, and we create this whole feeling of just despondency and despair. And so Nietzsche, trying to be very helpful, kind of said, well, he kind of gave us like 3 things that he thinks we can help us in this whole meaningless world that we live in. And one of the things that he suggested was go to the arts, go to the humanities. Learn, edify yourself with knowledge and education. Go to the arts, look at the paintings, go see a play, Hamlet, Shakespeare. See how other people deal with suffering in this world and joys and entertainments and things like that. The problem with that, though, is kind of what Karl Marx once said about religion. He said, religion is the opiate of the masses. I think what Nietzsche was basically saying was, go distract yourself from the despondency of a meaningless life. Go to the arts, go entertain yourselves, go get educated, learn about things, get yourself distracted, okay? Because I believe that that's really kind of the opiate of the atheist. You got to distract yourself from the despondency of fatalism, of meaninglessness. And then he said, well, he kind of realized that only the people who can really do that are wealthy individuals who have the time and money to go and hang out and get entertained and go to the museums and think deeply in their libraries, personal libraries. But for most of humanity, we're stuck to having to get a job, pay the bills, and deal with life issues and struggles and things of that nature. And so he kind of looked at, well, I guess those people are kind of out of luck. But maybe we'll have another idea. And so he thought, well, there's within us all this desire to find meaning of becoming great. We all want to be great. We want to become great at something. And so he came up with this idea called the Übermensch, the Superman, in other words. That basically he said, since life is meaningless, you have the opportunity to create your own meaning. In other words, other people don't have to impose their meaning upon you. You can be totally and utterly free from that. So you can create your own meaning. Whatever you want now with your life. However you perceive meaning, however you perceive purpose, you create that. That's yours. Now, at the outset of it, it sounds very tantalizing. Yes, I'm free from other people's oppressiveness about my own meaning and purpose in life. And yes, I do want to be great. I want to be great at something. But one of the things I don't think Nietzsche really understood was how that kind of found its way out into society. That not too many years after Nietzsche, there was this guy who was reading Nietzsche and reading some of his things and thought this whole idea of this Übermensch, to become great, and this desire for him to be great. And not only that, for his people to become great. His own people have been humiliated. They have been looked down upon. And so he found this whole Nietzschean idea of we need to create our own Übermensch, our own meaning and purpose as a people. And his name was Adolf Hitler. And so Adolf Hitler began to create meaning and purpose around this whole evolutionary idea that Nietzsche would speak of this Superman and this super race, the Aryans. But the question is what happens when somebody's set of meanings collide with somebody else's meaning of life? Because the Nazis had a different idea of meaning than the Jews did. And boom, you see the conflict between those two. Not only that, but what we see with the Übermensch, or the whole idea of the super race, the superhuman, to create your own identity and meaning and purpose in life, what it does, one of the downward sides of it, is it dehumanizes people, okay? Because ultimately, it's about my greatness, not about your greatness. And if your greatness gets in the way of my greatness, we're gonna have to do something about that. And if it's about a people's greatness, being great together, what do we do with those people in our society that drag us down, that keep us down? Like the poor and the indigent? What do we do with people who have deformities, who have mental illnesses, who are old and sick and are a drain on our resources? Well, Stalin and the Soviets came up with the answer to that. We got to get rid of them. Let's just send them out into the wasteland and let them all die. Let's get rid of them all. In order to maintain the Übermensch, the Soviet power, the Superman idea. And you see this also in Cambodia with Pol Pot and his communist regime as well. It is the 20th century, and the whole idea of this Übermensch has shown one of the bloodiest centuries in the humanity. Because God is dead. And if there is no God, life is meaningless. And so what I need to do and realize that it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, okay? Because why should I sacrifice my life for you when you may do when I give up my life for you and then you get to go on it and living a happy life, and when I could have been doing that? Why do I have to sacrifice for you? In fact, in a meaningless world, it's all about preservation, about our own comforts. And what we do is we become withdrawn from humanity as well, okay, instead of engaging in humanity. So you see this dehumanization to it. You see this isolation from it. And we see this within the context of our own culture. Did you know in New York has they do about somewhere between 82,000 and 97,000 abortions every year. Late-term abortions, they probably have somewhere between 800 and 900. It's almost twice as many homicides in the state of New York. There's something about when our culture begins to dehumanize other individuals, things begin to kind of start going downward spiral. When we begin to think that meaning of life is really about me and what's good for me and what's good for my meaning, what's good for my purpose, and how I then begin to arrange that life around in such a way that it can even dehumanize other people, because ultimately life is meaningless. Other people's lives are meaningless. And for my own self-preservation, in order to keep my own sanity and meaning, then sometimes I have to dehumanize other people in other situations. The other thing that we've seen through our culture as well, that even reverberates even today, Nietzsche even kind of speaks into our hearts, is that this idea of creating our own meaning and purpose keeps us detached from other people, because other people can be a competitor to my meaning and purpose. And so the way that I want to live my life with meaning and purpose, I'm going to live it the way that I want to live it, how I want to live it, doing the things that I want to do. And sometimes I can conflict with other people. And so in conflicting with other people, we tend to withdraw. We either fight or withdraw. We see in our own culture, our own country, how much fighting goes on because we have power struggles over meaning and purpose. Not only that, but we see more and more isolation within our culture than ever before. We're more depressed, we're more isolated, we're more lonely than ever before. In fact, I read an article just yesterday of how the pharmaceutical industry sees a big boondoggle of creating a pill to make you and I less lonely. Because in our modern culture, of what we've created for ourselves, has created a lot of vast loneliness within us. Freud came a little bit later, after Nietzsche, and Freud too agreed with Nietzsche and said, yes, that's true. Meaning is an illusion. Now, when you're born, you have meaning because your meaning is tethered to your mom and dad. And so your mom and dad love you, and so you feel this sense of security, you feel this sense of meaning and purpose. But when dealing with real life, when we grow up, when we become adults, when we become mature, we begin to recognize that really our life is just dust in the wind. Our lives have no more meaning than anything else in this universe. And Freud is a little bit more pragmatic and a little bit more depressive about how to deal with this. He just said, suck it up. Be stoic about it. Just deal with it. Mature people just have to deal with hard things, so just deal with it, was his answer to that. What you see to the conclusion of these two guys' lives is not really inspiring either. Nietzsche hated his family. He had amazing problems with relationships and with women, and he just went nuts. He went crazy. They don't know why he went crazy. Either went crazy because of syphilis, or he went crazy because of just the own ideas and thoughts of what truly is the end goal of his meaningless life. Freud lived a life that was detached. He was never very close to anybody, and he was incredibly terrified of death. I mean, really fearfully of death. It was something that haunted him so much a part of his life. In fact, Freud once said this when he was trying to console a close friend of his. And this was how he consoled people in his life. This was with somebody who died. He said, "As an unbelieving fatalist, I can only let my arms sink before the tears of death. I hope you find that comforting in your loss." That's all he got. That's all he had. And he died of euthanasia and just not a really happy individual. But here's the thing. When Nietzsche and Freud came on the scene in the intellectual world, they were considered this new and revolutionaries, these enlightened, smart individuals to evolved even, would you use the word, evolved individuals of intellect and knowledge and understanding of life and humanity. But what they taught was nothing new. It was nothing new. You know? It was nothing new. In fact, all that they really basically said and were teaching us and are teaching us is just to go back before there was ever Jesus Christ. That's it. They're not giving us nothing new. They're not giving us any new solutions. They're just basically saying, hey, go back to the Stoics, go back to the Epicureans, how to deal with this meaningless type of life. They have really nothing new to offer us. You see, in fact, the outcomes in their thinking about life is actually really biblical. Did you know that? These guys were more biblical than they even really thought. 3,000 years ago, there was a guy who just put it on himself and thought, I'm just going to go and observe this world. And I'm going to observe what is meaningful and what is purposeful. What is it that gives us meaning? Is it pleasure? Is it popularity? Is it money? Is it achievement? Doing something big and worthwhile and becoming somebody of importance and building great buildings and all of that. So this guy went out and observed all of these things. We have his writings. God has preserved his writings for us. It's called Ecclesiastes. But this is what he wrote here in his work here that we call Ecclesiastes. In Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9 and on, he says this, very insightfully. This is 3,000 years ago. History merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. But actually, it's old. Nothing is ever truly new. Nietzsche and Freud are only new if only what you know is of the last 200 years. But what you find is, there's nothing new. There's nothing new that they offer. In verse 11, he goes on and he says this, we don't remember what happened in the past, and in the future generations, no one's going to remember what we're doing right now. All right? It just repeats itself. You've probably heard that before. 3,000 years ago, it was written this. So anyways, this guy's looking out into the landscape of everything under the sun. This is just this world. If we're just looking at the world that we live in, basically, what he came to the conclusion emphatically was it's all meaningless. Everything done under the sun is just meaningless. Ecclesiastes 2:1, he says, I looked at pleasure. I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. Let's go to the arts. Let's go to the humanities. Let's go to sex. Let's go to, anything that gives us pleasure. He said, but I found that this too is meaningless. All right, you feel great, feel inspired, but then it's over. And then you feel great, you feel inspired, it's over. And repeat. Ultimately, I don't really see much of meaning in that. And then he goes on in verse 11 and said, what about hard work? Let's try hard work. See if there's meaning and purpose around just hard work in and of itself, and that's it. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was also meaningless. Like chasing in the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. In other words, all the things I work hard on get old, dilapidated, or forgotten. Okay? Or he just kind of goes on, or I pass it on to somebody else who may not even do anything with it or just really mess it all up. As he says here, he would say, what about wisdom? So what about wisdom? Maybe we can find meaning and purpose in our own intellect, in our own wisdom and knowledge and understanding of things. Well, this is what he said. He said, well, for the wise can see where they're going. All right, I get that. But fools walk in the dark. All right? Yet I saw that the wise and the foolish share the same fate. They end up in the same place. Okay? So you may be smarter than me, but you and I, we're going to end up in the same place. You can be all hoity-toity about how brilliant you are, but you know what? You and I, we're going to be in the same place. So he says, both will die, verse 15. So I said to myself, since I will end up the same as the fool, what's the value of all my wisdom? This is all so meaningless. For the wise and the foolish both die, and the wise will not be remembered any longer than the fool. So in the days to come, both will be forgotten. Just who cares? Then he said, well, what about, the people who take my place? Successors, building the machine, building the empire, building the business. He says this in verse 19, and who can tell whether my successors will be wise or foolish? Yet they will control everything I have gained by my skill and hard work under the sun. How meaningless. You think about, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, it's nowhere existence. But man, some people worked really hard on those things. You look at corporations and people who gave all their life to the hard work of the corporation, and then when they retired or died, they had to pass it on to somebody else. And some of them, they passed down to kids who just wanted the money, didn't work very hard, and messed it all up. And he's saying, that's meaningless. That's meaningless too. Then he goes and he says in chapter 4, in verse 16, he said, endless crowds stand around him. But then another generation grows up and rejects him too. So it is all meaningless, like chasing the wind. In other words, what he's saying here is like popularity. Man, at one moment, everybody thinks you're amazing. Then they think you're horrible, right? Man, at one moment, you just want to think, man, if I can just be like Beyonce and everybody thinks I'm amazing and incredible, what's going to happen is you're just going to become like Madonna, all right? So what's going to happen? So he looked at that and just went, man, all right, that's meaningless too. And he said, what about being good? Maybe being good. Maybe there's some meaning and purpose behind being good. And he says this in chapter 7. He says, I have seen everything in this meaningless life, including the death of good young people and the long life of wicked people. So why should I be good? Why should I be good? I be good and I die or get thrown into prison. And this Yahoo goes and he's just a despot, lives this great life. That kind of stinks. It's meaningless. Meaningless, it's all meaningless. And then chapter 8, verse 14, if you haven't had enough. And this is not all that is meaningless in our world. In this life, good people are often treated as though they are wicked, and wicked people are often treated as though they are good. This is so meaningless. So meaningless. And then he ends it all here in chapter 12. He says, in verse 8, he says, everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. All right. You guys feeling a little depressed? So here's the thing. There is good news. There is good news. You see, even to the writer of Ecclesiastes and to us, that God sent his son, Jesus Christ. It's a historical reality, and we talked about that 2 weeks ago. You can go online, you can look at that. If you weren't here for that, because that's where everything hinges. Everything hinges on Jesus Christ's death and resurrection. But when you realize the realities and the truth of Jesus Christ coming into this world, then you begin to understand that what meaning and purpose really is. You know why Jesus Christ came into this world? He came into this world in order to take us who have been untethered to God, to tether us back to him. Because he's the bread of life. He is the living water by which we find our sustenance and meaning and being and fullness of life. And I get why sometimes in humanity that we think that to be untethered means freedom. I believe that there was a generation that grossly misunderstood Jesus Christ, and they thought that what we should do, and the answer to that is to become untethered from God. And that way we would no longer be under the bounds of religion, which was not Jesus anyways, but I think that's where they got it wrong. And I think they have a really wrong idea of what liberty is. Okay? Sometimes we think that, man, to be untethered from something means now I must be fully liberated. It's not true. You get a little bowl with a fish in it, and you take that fish and you throw it out of the water. You are free from water. Woohoo! Oh, look, he's flapping on the table. He must be really happy to be outside the water. He's feeling the existence of freedom from the slavery of water. And look at him. He looks so happy. He's slowing down. He's slowing. What's going on? And he dies. We are enslaved and tethered to oxygen. That's a good thing. I just want to live my life free of oxygen. I want to be liberated from oxygen. That'd be awesome. We're going to die. When humanity made the choice and the decision to untether himself from God, he didn't realize how much that he was killing himself. I'm liberated. I'm liberated. Why do I not feel so good? Why do I feel depressed and lonely? Why do I feel in despair and meaningless? I'm dying. I'm dying. So Jesus Christ came into this world to tether us back to him, where we find our love and our meaning and our sustenance, by which we see how we can truly live this life to the fullest. I love what Paul said about Jesus here and about his meaning, his purpose for why he came here. Romans 5, verse 7 and 8. Now, most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, though someone might perhaps be willing to die for a person who is especially good, okay? But if there's no meaning and purpose in life, why would I want to die for anybody? Because this is about me. Why would I want to cut my life short for you, okay? But why would I then take it a little bit further? If this is all we got and this is the only life we have and it's all meanings and purposes after this, why would I even want to die for an enemy? Why would I want to die for an enemy that may go on living a pretty decent life as a wicked individual? I ain't going to do that. I'm not going to do that. But what if God had something bigger, something greater planned, something that is not just temporal here, but is meaningful and eternal? And that's why Jesus could come into this world and die for you and I. We're his enemies. He cut his life short because he knew that there was something more. There was no self-preservation in this. This was about you and I. And so he goes on in verse 8, he said, but God showed his great love for us. Sinners, broken people, selfish, wounded, all of that stuff. God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. Jesus totally upends the whole idea of meaning and purpose. Because in a meaningless world, there's no such thing as sacrifice. It's only consumption. But when Jesus Christ came and said, no. There's a bigger and greater plan by the restoration of humanity. And somebody needs to come in and lay down their life for the sake of other people, even the wicked. And you got to trust me in this, because not only will it change humanity, but it will change things forever. And the beautiful thing about it is, there's nothing more that changes humanity more than sacrifice and laying down one's life for another person. But it only has meaning in knowing that God's going to do something about it and do something with it, and that he's going to reward us, and that we're going to have eternal life. Paul wrote another letter in Corinthians, and he says this about this whole new meaning and purpose by which for us to live. He said, either way, Christ's love controls us. Paul says this. And Paul, it's interesting about Paul, because Paul said this, it's like, if Christ didn't raise from the dead, then I'm good. I'm one of the most, you should pity me. I'm one of the most pitiful people, because I've suffered and I've suffered and I've suffered and I suffered for all of this stuff. I gave my life away. So if he didn't raise from the dead, all of this stuff is a sham. So please feel really, really sorry for me. But he says, but that's not true. He is alive. I've seen him. I know people who were there when it happened. And so I've untethered myself from myself, and I've untethered myself from this world, and I've tethered myself to this guy who is alive and who loves me and gave his life for me and sacrificed it for me. And he says, either way, Christ's love now controls me. In fact, the greatest freedom that I have, I think Paul would say over and over in all his letters, the greatest freedom I have is to be controlled by the love of Jesus Christ. Nothing else. So Christ's love controls us. Since we believe that Christ died for all, we also believe that we have all died to our old life, meaning we have untethered ourselves from ourselves. We've untethered ourselves from this world, and we've now tethered ourselves to Jesus Christ, who died for us, sacrificed his life for us, rose from the dead for us, in order to bring us back to God and order for us to be with him forever and ever and ever and ever. And then he said in verse 15, he died for everyone so that those who receive his new life, those who are now tethered in him, no longer live for themselves. The craziest thing about a Christ follower is when the Christ follower says, all right, I'm willing to lay down my life, but we're only willing to lay down our life knowing that we're going to live forever. And we're only willing to lay down our life and sacrifice it for somebody else, only in knowing that we are loved and taken care of by our God. Beyond that, if we don't have that, we're taking care of ourselves. And that's where you see the irony of it all, and why I believe in God, is that when we live a life without God, we consume and we earn doom. We begin to consume each other on this. But when we tether ourselves from Christ and we're willing to let go of our lives, then we become the sweet aroma of what love is and what the world really needs. That love, that unconditional love that is eternal. And now we're able to let go of the things of this world and let go of our old life because we have now clung on to the God who loves us. That's our purpose. Your purpose in life is to be tethered to a God who loves you. And your purpose in life is to enjoy him immensely. Your purpose in life, now that you've been detethered from this world, is to go and love the people that you come in contact with tomorrow at work. That you are the love of the people that you live around. You are the hope for the hopeless. The world needs us. The world needs a group of people who are willing to lay down their life because they understand that there's something even better coming. And that something even better coming is not wishful thinking, but is rooted in the historical realities of a God who loves us, who sent his son to really, truly die for us, and who really rose from the dead. You know, in the 200s, there was a group of Christians in Alexandria. There was a great plague in Alexandria. And people were leaving left and right. They didn't have what we have in the medical world and all that. All the people were just leaving Alexandria. The plague was hot. It was horrible. People were running out. But there were a group of people who stayed there. They stayed there to take care of those who are hurt and those who are ill, knowing that more than likely they're going to be ill, get ill, and die as well. You know what that group of people were? It's a group of Jesus followers. See, if life is meaningless, purposeless, let's get out of town. But Jesus Christ really did live, and he did really raise from the dead. Let's go right into the middle of the plague and be a sweet aroma to a world that is dying, because we know who we have and we know where we're going. That's the meaning and the purpose of our lives. We're going to come in time a little communion here. And as we do, I think it's great to recognize and to remember that Jesus Christ really died for you. He really does love you. And he would do it again over and over. He would cut his life short if it meant to lengthen your life for all eternity. So when you come and you take of the bread, which symbolizes his body, which was given for you, and his blood, which is shed for you, it's a reminder to you of the historical realities of what he's done for you. But even more than that, The beautiful thing about meaning and purpose, it's all wrapped up in a relationship that he wants to have with you. I just encourage all of you guys that through this, that you never stop exploring God. You never stop. You keep after him. You basically, man, I tell you, if you say, God, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not going to leave anywhere, I'm going to hold on to your ankles until you show me yourself, I guarantee you he will show you himself. He's already shown himself around us, the creation of this world, through his word and what he's done for us, through our better understanding of meaning and purpose in life. But there's still so much more we can explore in the beautiful relationship with him. We'll also have people over here in the corners for you to pray for. If there's things that are going on in your life, you may feel like your life is in a bit of despair and feeling lonely and isolated and just dealing with some junk in your life. Don't be isolated. The beautiful thing about what Jesus Christ did and accomplished was to also bring meaning and purpose around a community, around doing life together as well. Let me pray. Father, I thank you. I thank you that you give us the freedom to explore you. You don't get mad, you don't get angry because we may doubt and we may get a little fearful. We may even get a little bit angry, or we may even sometimes we're just stupid. I love the fact that you still love us. You still pursue us. You still sacrifice for us. That you want us to know you. You want us to have the peace that surpasses all understanding. I pray for anybody in here who's feeling like their life is meaningless and purposeless. I pray that today's the day that they would be shattered from that. That they would come and lay their heart and their life before you. They would begin a journey of understanding how meaningful it is to know you and follow you. And to experience your goodness and your love in this world and this life. Life is not meaningless. We made it that way. And so, God, we want to make the decision to tether our lives back to you, because it's in you that everything becomes meaningful. It's in your son's name I pray.